So welcome, I'm Dawn Taloyo. Some faces here are very familiar. You've been church chair for years, and as I've said, have been faithful and coming to these occasional webinar times. And there's definitely new faces today, and I'm really excited about that. So that's the interesting world of, working with our church chairs is, it's ever evolving as everyone's on different cycles of annual meetings and voting in new folks. So let me just, for those who are new, introduce myself. I'm the Director of Pastoral and Congregational Health for the conference and working on the conference staff. And I have someone else joining. And I'm really thrilled that Greg can join us today too, our superintendent, Greg Yee. So he is here with us. And probably for about a year and a half or so, we've been doing occasional church chair webinars. And if you go to our conference website, there is on one of the menus a drop down that is called Church Chair exChange. And you can go to our website and see previous webinars that were recorded on various topics that we felt were pertinent. And you're welcome to watch those, and at some point we may recycle through some of those topics, as they're always very helpful and asked that we get requests or interest in those. So we'll continue to do this as people come on and are always open. I'm always asking, if you have a topic that you would love for us to cover, just let me know and we can try and make that happen. So it looks like we've got a good group here, and I want to be able to do some introductions so you can know one another and who's on the call. So again, add your church name to your name there if you can, to rename yourself so it includes your church. So today is going to be a little different. As I said in the emails, as Greg and I talked, we're just continuing to feel the need to offer opportunities just to process or ask questions of one another and kind of learn best practices or hear from each other what people are experiencing at your churches, how you're processing this season, what questions you're asking and working through as leadership teams. So this time is really meant to be that opportunity for you to ask and listen. And when Greg and I can share some thoughts, we will, or just I'll throw it out to the group, how are others figuring this out? I believe you can even, I can't remember, is there a way to raise your hand in Zoom, Greg, or no?
Yeah, you have to go to the participants window.
Okay.
You can raise your hand there.
Okay, or the reactions. Yeah, Brian, thanks. I was gonna say you can do a thumbs up too if you want to do it that way.
And we're small enough that if you just raise your hand, we'll see.
Yeah, that's true. We're small. That's a good point. So I'm gonna call on you to just introduce yourself, and you can say your church, where it's at geographically, and also your role. Maybe how long you've been serving in that role, and I'll call on you based on where you show up on my screen. So Carolyn, you are first up.
Okay, I'm Carolyn Nicewinder. I attend Selah Covenant Church, which is outside of Yakima, so east of the mountains. And I have been church chair for 4 years now, and will be leaving as soon as we have a meeting sometime in July.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. Stephen.
Hi, my name is Stephen Ombo. I am with Bridge Covenant Church in Salem, Oregon. Am a very fresh chair as of like a meeting ago, a week ago.
Like a special prize for that, Stephen.
So yeah, glad to be here.
Thanks, Stephen. Pastor David.
Hey, greetings. I'm David Robinson from Cannon Beach Community Church, and I'm kind of an anomaly because we were adopted in as Presbyterians, and the Presbyterian system has the pastor serving as the chair of the session. I'm currently serving as the chair. I tried to get out of it, and the leadership team would not have it 8 years ago when we were adopted. So I serve as the chair and as the lead pastor, and I've been here since 1993.
Great. Thanks, David. Ivan Judson.
Good day. My name is Ivan Judson. I serve at Pine Lake Covenant Church on the east side. I am actually the vice chair. So assuming no more pandemic type chaos, I will assume chairship in the fall after our annual meeting. But I don't hold out hope that there won't be any more chaos.
Okay. Well, welcome, Ivan. It's good to see you. Brian.
Hello, I'm Brian Whitaker. I'm the chair of First Covenant Church Seattle. I am 1 month away from completing my 6-year term. I remind my vice chair of that every week, that I'm excited. As an overachiever, I'm also the treasurer of the Pacific Northwest Conference. So I think I've been doing that since 2010 or 11. So from one crisis to the next. It's good to be with you all.
Yeah, so grateful for Brian. Yep, thank you. Ron.
Hi, I'm Ron Thies. I'm a little guy in Corvallis, Oregon. So the Well Covenant Church, I'm not technically so challenged as to, I don't know how to change the change.
Okay.
When you said add your little deal, so I went,
no worries.
You thought it was iPad Covenant Church, Ron.
yeah, www.
Now that might work.
We are a reforming group, I guess I would say, or reforming, and not to in the word form meaning deciding we're going to start again. We downsized back in September last year, could no longer afford our pastor, so we released him and have, we're a relatively small group that's been meeting by Zoom, and we're on this Pentecost Sunday, we're going to be discerning whether or not how to continue, or if God wants us to continue. And Dawn Taloyo will be our guest speaker via the Zoom, I'm thinking. Yeah.
Holy Spirit fire will come
Yeah,
down.
totally fired up. We
Pentecost.
That's right. We were visited by a gentleman named no, it wasn't Greg.
Peter,
who came down, and he said he thought he was going to close us down, but instead he gave us the blessing. So we've been going for about 6-7 months, meeting by Zoom, and it's been great. We had our first prayer meeting this morning outdoors, so that was really fun to just pray outside in God's beauty. So
Wonderful.
we're excited.
thanks.
We probably
Ron.
have the smallest potential of challenges to open up with, I guess, because we're so small.
That's true.
We're happy with anything that happens, So
It's a good spirit there. Thank you.
Ron's wife, Pam, is on the executive board for the conference as well.
Mm-hmm.
She's the brains of the outfit, right?
All right, next up. Oh, sorry, Greg.
Forgot to mention that Carolyn's coming onto the board as well.
Yeah. So watch out when you serve as chair or spouse to the chair.
Yeah.
That's how come on our radar.
That's how we get to know you. All right, next up is Mark Finneran.
Yes, I'm Mark Finneran. I'm the vice chair at Trinity Covenant Church. We helped raise Dawn in her skill sets, and
That's right.
from a rookie to the professional that she is now, and handed her off to Greg E to finish the polishing and that kind of thing. But no, we very much appreciated Dawn's experience with us. A great pastor for us, and so I'm the vice chair for. Well, I got my yard signs out, my mailing campaign. We have our annual meeting this Sunday, and Catherine, and you'll see her down here too, has been my teacher, mentor for the chair role that I'm up for nomination on. So.
Okay. Oh, I'll have to hear more about how you're doing your annual meeting.
It's well, we're all set to do a Zoom meeting.
Okay.
We had to actually provide people mail-in ballots, despite whatever government administration's pro or cons. But anyway, the folks have their ballots, and we have 90 members who have committed to attend the Zoom meeting, and then they'll have a chance to vote. They have to postmark their ballot on Monday, between Monday and next Friday, and then we receive them, and then we'll have people count, and then we'll affirm whatever the vote is on our leadership meeting that Tuesday. But we are doing the vote by mail process. So.
Interesting. All right.
We have all of our anti-fraud, voter fraud methods in place, and we should be good to go. So.
All right. Good job. Thanks, Mark. How about Merle?
Thanks.
Merle Dodson. Can you unmute yourself, Merle?
There we go.
Yeah, great. I'm so glad you're here, Merle.
Yeah, me too. Looking forward to being with you.
You want to introduce yourself? Oh, where'd he go? Wait, Merle, come back. Unmute yourself and introduce.
I think he.
There he is.
There we are.
Okay.
There it is, yeah.
Am I
Where are you
back?
from?
You're
Yes, you're back.
From Gresham, Oregon. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
Your
Oregon.
chair.
Yeah, I'm the chairman of Bow Valley Covenant.
Right.
Welcome, Merle. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good to see you folks.
And finally, I have Chris Kyle.
Everyone.
Couple more.
Oh, and Catherine. Oh, my squares got moved around. I'm sorry about that. So Chris, go, and then a couple more.
Yeah, so Chris Kyle with Emmanuel Bible Church. We are relatively new to the Covenant ecosystem, and for about 5 years, but I'm the treasurer, not the chair. And I'd reached out to Dawn earlier this week, who suggested this call being quite helpful for some of the questions that I had reached out to her for, and happy to see that Brian's on here too. So mainly just looking to gather information, you all, and apologies for the lack of video. I'm actually on a work call at the same time on a different phone, so I'm kind of juggling between the two, and unfortunately couldn't get at it, so I'm going to be playing back and forth, but nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Sure. Thanks, Chris. Glad you can do double duty. All right, Catherine.
Catherine Jacobson from Trinity Covenant, and I have the distinction of being at the first leadership team meeting when Pastor Don resigned.
That's the distinction.
Rub it in. Rub it in.
Yes, we miss her a lot. Where her parents are in our church, we're thankful for that. It means that we see her and her kids from time to time. I was on the at-large member for 1 year, and I'm just finishing my 3rd year as chair and handing off to Mark, who needs very little mentoring, by the way. We've had a really good working relationship this last couple of years, and Pastor John and Mark and I have met before almost every single leadership team meeting, and I can't say enough how grateful I've been for Mark's expertise, in particular in HR issues.
That's right. That is his expertise. So that will be
and
helpful to us too.
I have been being treated for cancer, as you may be able to tell by the hat. And so Mark has really taken the frontline leadership for the last 2 or 3 months here. I'm also thankful for that. He said he would do the work and let me get the credit. I think that's a pretty good vice chair.
Yeah, right.
We're a great team. It's been a great partnership.
It's been a good time. Yeah.
And really grateful, Catherine, that you've come to the end of your chemo treatments, right?
Me too, yeah. Now I just wait for the rest of my life to see what happens.
Yeah, bless you. All right, last on my list, unless I miss someone, is Rod Coteau.
Hi, I'm Rod. I am the chair of Countryside Community Church in Sherwood, Oregon. And I've got 2 months left, and then hand it off to my vice chair.
It's a lot of senioritis going on in this.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, well, good to see you, Rod. Thanks for joining.
I wonder if are we gonna have a graduation ceremony, with the pomp and circumstance and
I
the
should have made
robes
little signs.
And a little, kind of a diploma. Of course, you can't all be together, so I don't know how you're gonna do that. So
I know. Well, everyone, welcome. And I really, again, appreciate whether it's your first time here or your last time with us. So clearly we have quite a group with a lot of wisdom here and experience and hopefully questions. So I really want you to take advantage of this opportunity. If you have some things that your team is wrestling with, to ask them. And again, there might be questions that Greg or I can field, or that we'll just throw out to the rest of you. And, you know, we've been receiving questions, you know, certainly over the last couple of months, it's been evolving, and what those questions have changed. But certainly there have been questions about, how do we do our annual meeting? Can we do our annual meeting? How do we think about finances during this time? Do we apply for PPP or not? And so that kind of has run its course. And now that, you know, there's questions about reopening, or I know some people don't like us to use that phrase particularly, or that term, but returning to gathering in person. So any of those questions are valid, or others that you are thinking of. But so think about that, and you can either raise a hand or put it in the chat. But Greg, is there anything you want to say as we kind of get going here?
Yeah, I just put something in the chat. If you don't have the window open already, I put the 2 links that Dawn referenced earlier, as far as the chair exchanges, and then the COVID-19 resources that we've been throwing up there, different webinars and links, and the link to the denomination as well. And a couple of you, I think, are incoming chairs, you said. And so if you can just shoot us your email and best phone number, we'll stick you into Salesforce and make sure you get all the future emails and stuff like that. Okay. Yeah, it seems like overall, everything is changing every week, right? Almost every day. And as quickly as we were saying, you know, what's been really guiding us is that we're not going to have a vaccine until next summer. So medically, not a whole lot is going to change for us, and yet we're starting to see all of these openings. Now, certainly on the therapeutic side, you know, if there some of these drugs that seem to be helping, including our own Manuel Lozano, who is our pastor of our Latino church in Olympia. He got COVID-19, but from an asymptomatic son who got it from work, and ended up in the hospital, the pastor. But he took one of those drugs, I'm forgetting the name of it, but it's the one that's been in the news this last week. So maybe that might give us some sense that there's, you know, safer environment as far as the therapy side. But certainly when we think about our churches, there's just a lot to weigh in the balance. I know all of you have been in a lot of conversations in your leadership teams and your staff teams. But the main thing that Dawn and I have been really trying to communicate is, as you well know, it's not going to be like a light switch, right? It's not going to be suddenly we can go back to what it was before all of this. There's going to be a phasing. There's going to be you know, maybe certain levels of disappointment from your people because certain things, you know, we need to have in place or not have anymore. So we would love just to kind of open that up and just hear about some of the conversations you are having. We have no shortage of opinions and insights, but we really wanted this to be more of a pure resourcing time and sharing and interacting. So less of the talking heads here. So can I just throw out the first question, Dawn?
Sure.
So, you know, we've encouraged churches to form task forces or to develop reentry plans. I know some of you have done that. I think Cannon Beach has done that. I'm trying to think of any of the other churches on here have. I'm not sure. But let's just share that. What are some of the conversations about what reentry building looks like for you all?
At Trinity, we formed with members from our leadership team as well as some of the congregational people, three forces, maybe there were 4, but we have the one for planning, the ability to regather, we have budget and technology, those 3 things. And they've been, I think, highly functional and useful, and people in our church have responded well to the plans that are being made. Mark, were there any other teams?
No, but I think those 3, because it was a small group of 1 or 2 leadership meetings with like the worship team leader is on the
Right.
committee for reopening,
Right, okay.
trying to
Just, I
figure
think
out
that's
what does that
we've
look
done, and
like? When does it look like?
it's been helpful, I believe.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, we've gotten some really good feedback on how to go forward with a smaller group, kind of really focused on a certain area. I'm on the budget committee. We started planning our annual budget in February based on what our, vision was, mission was, full church was. Well, then that's actually voted on this Sunday. But now we're trying to figure out how do we run an expense control with that budget, because we have budget money for a mission trip to Peru. Well, it's an annual budget, so maybe we'll go next year, but we're not going to go this year. So trying to control expenses within that budget is our focus right now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You'll see in the chat that Pastor David put Cannon Beach's plan on there, so feel free to download that, grab that. Sorry, Stephen, I think I interrupted you.
I was just going to ask, what were those three teams? I heard the last two, the budget and technology, but what was the other Trinity?
We have one on the reopening plan. How do we reopen with whatever the county and state guidelines are, and then a team on the budget review, and then the technology, what kind of new technology. We are finding we're going to have some expenses on newer computers that have more capacity, probably Macs, because the IBMs just don't give us the technology for combining presentations and music and slides, and so there's a team looking at the technology piece.
Gotcha. Thanks.
One of the discussions that we're having, we're just beginning. We just commissioned a team to sort of come up with a plan at Pine Lake about 2 weeks ago. One of the things that we've noticed, I'll offer observations. They're meant as conversation starters. I'd love feedback from everyone. One is, during this pandemic, we as an LT have started meeting every other week to be a lot more frequently in conversation and in conversation together around things that are changing ridiculously fast. I think one of the things that we've done during the pandemic at Pine Lake is our Sunday services are clearly all online, but they're pre-produced. So all the content is built during the week, and then it's essentially published and people experience it on Sunday. We see a significant part of our rollout planning being a shift from all in person to all online, somewhere in the middle, where it actually has to be online but live. And to be frank, some of our worship team is incredibly uncomfortable with that. They have a high degree of value on the professionally produced content, and I question how much community feeling is lost with high production value content versus a mistake that's allowed here and there because we're human beings and we're a community trying to do things together. And that's an open conversation. And it's going to create some tension over the next few weeks to months, I think.
Ivan, when you guys play the recording on Sunday, is there live interaction around that recording?
No.
Oh, so it's no chat at all, no live chat.
No, it's, to be honest, it's from my point of view, I've been working with online technology systems since the mid-90s.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I have done for a living. It's disappointing in a way, but I don't mean that as a condemnation or anything else. We're doing the best that we can.
Yeah.
At the same time, we're missing an absolute ton of engagement opportunities because we don't have the budget, the technology, the knowledge, the staff, the support. And to be absolutely frank, I don't think that given all of that, we would know how to do it, because we're living in a consuming society right now, not a participatory society.
Mm-hmm.
People don't participate in Sunday morning worship other than to sing and to give. I mean, trying to find ushers and support staff is an awkward thing because it takes them from consuming to participating. And I think this is the opportunity right now for us to create emotion of re-engaging our congregants in participatory worship instead of consuming worship. And I don't know how we do that.
Ivan, appreciate your thoughts.
One response I would have is, 'cause ours is all pre-recorded, and our pastor John did say it was difficult to preach to an empty room, because he records the sermon on Thursday, and he was just awkward trying to do a sermon to empty space. So he kind of struggled with that just personally for a while. His wife actually got pictures of people from our directory and put it on chairs out in front so you could talk to people. But I don't know who started it. Catherine might know who started it, but we formed a chat time a half hour before the recorded service. And our service is available through Facebook and our website, but there's a Zoom chat time at 10:30 where folks, just like we're doing, are just on Zoom, and they're talking and chatting and sharing things. And so it's been able to get more of a broader mix of folks seeing each other, because we have talked a lot about how important it is to see each other, and allowed some of the sharing about difficulties that are happening, that sort of thing. So that worked, I thought, pretty nicely.
I think that's been, I don't remember who suggested it either. Might have even been Dan and Ruth Johnson, but Dan Johnson moderates it, and I wouldn't miss it. It's just so nice to see faces, and usually we end in just a brief prayer, and Dan prays for people and their particular needs, and it's yeah, I think it's been about as important as anything that we have done. And on Monday mornings, John opens a room or a Zoom to people to talk to him about the sermon from the previous day. And I've done that several times. It's not, it hasn't been my thing as much as the lobby, but people like, if they ask questions, they talk about what it meant, and have good chances to interact with him directly. I think that's very valuable. We've done quite a bit of Zoom stuff where I think we're doing this part pretty well.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
how many people? Sorry, Dawn.
No, it's okay.
Just to add on to that, we've got several Bible studies we've been doing on Zoom during the week. But we historically at First Covenant, we would have a coffee hour between the service and then Sunday school and then our community lunch. And we pooched an idea from the conference. So I give a shout out to the staff. We love, having 85 people on a call, but it gets to be a little overwhelming. And what we did is we've been using the breakout groups. We found that's hugely successful. There are certain households with puppies or children that most people want to get into, but we've been breaking out into groups of 5 or so, and we found that we've been doing that the last 3 weeks, and that's made a huge difference in the terms of interest and participation and connection. So I just wanted to add that.
That's awesome. I was wondering, with Trinity, how many people show up to that open lobby?
For the Zoom, have you been on it, Mark? I would say somewhere between 30 and 40.
Wow.
It's been manageable so far.
Okay, and there are no breakout rooms used. It's like just
not now. Okay, but that's an idea to keep in mind, I think.
I do think one anomaly we run into in Pine Lake, being in Sammamish, is that we have a lot of tech members, which means essentially they're currently right now spending about 40 to 60 hours a week on Zoom.
Yeah.
Or on Teams or some other thing to do their day job.
Yeah.
So getting them to participate and engage online on the weekend is also an additional challenge that we face. And that's
real.
That's not to say that we can't do it, but just a context that that's where a lot of people, I mean, I know that Greg, you and Dawn you're operating in this mode today as well. So you can imagine one of the things that we're balancing is sort of collaboration fatigue.
Yes, we've been hearing a lot about Zoom fatigue and whatnot, and actually we're hearing that numbers are starting to decline in terms of attendance on Sundays. But I would be curious if you're actually seeing that, or if because that's been very anecdotal, and so we've wondered, if our people are just getting tired of being on the computer, or because the weather's changing or whatnot. So.
Or they pick up the recording later instead of being on it during the
Yeah.
live time. Yeah,
That's true. We do the pre-recorded service that's posted Friday night, so people can actually join anytime over the weekend. Well, and later than that, we have our Bible study group is a Zoom meeting, and there's about 14 of us, and some people listen to the sermon before because our discussion is around the questions posed from the sermon that the pastor has put together. So it can be a wide span of people listening. We have found that we've had increase from all over the U.S., not just the state, but the U.S., and even from some other countries. And some of those folks who have joined us and have never been to church are beginning to ask questions. So they will send in questions to Scott or to Rebecca and ask about the sermon and their thoughts on that. At first, it was kind of a lark. Well, we're joining because we want to see Pastor Scott. We knew him back in those old college days, that kind of thing.
His old girlfriend.
Now, some of them are just saying, hey, what you're saying is starting to make sense. I wonder about this and that. And even Rebecca, who didn't go to college with them, they've been asking when she preaches some questions of her.
Great.
So that's really awesome in that sense. But this last Sunday, I noticed there were less people who joined. And I wonder if it was the Memorial Day weekend and they just didn't participate on Sunday, but maybe they'll listen later in the week.
Yeah.
It's hard to have that kind of interaction when you're pre-recording it. Our goal is somehow to do live streaming, but we have a lot of technology issues to work out yet, and pulling of cables and various things like that to make it work for us. We do have a task force made up of a few leadership team members and staff, and we've just really begun. Yakima County is surging with cases. So we aren't even to phase 2 in the governor's phase-in projects. And we continue to have deaths, and we continue to have hospitalizations and that kind of thing. So our plan is to go right now with the governor's phasing in, even though there's a few members who want us to open immediately. But that's not quite doable. So we have broken up some tasks, and we're trying to, we'll reconvene again next week. We're starting to meet weekly to try and get ready for when that opening might come. But right now, as it stands, it's kind of like, I don't know that we'll open till July in terms of being able to be in that second phase.
I was on with the council of superintendents. We actually have bumped up our frequency to weekly now. So just like you guys there, Ivan. And they, we're already making decisions about all of the conference programming for the rest of the year. And we haven't announced it officially yet. But one thing I heard from my colleague from Southeast Conference is that in her mind, she said, everything is canceled for the rest of the year, but she's only going to communicate things 2 months at a time, because that's kind of, that makes sense, right? There's enough leeway. And then the encouragement has been, don't be the first one out, right? Don't be the one that blazes this trail. You don't need to be the earliest adopter on this. Be in the middle of the pack is what our insurance people are telling us, right? And so, and once you see the early adopters go out, give yourself at least 4 weeks just to see what they're experiencing. That's good leadership, I think. So it makes a lot of sense. Like, we can't really see very far, but maybe we just take it at a chunk at a time and just communicate that expectation to the church so they can digest it that way better. Right. Yeah, Brian.
That's a great comment. I'm curious. the insurance people, is what caught my attention. I think for us in Seattle, we're kind of in that same space, right? We're probably going to invest some money in getting into the live stream and to try to find a way to kind of keep moving forward. The question I keep wondering and worrying about is just the liability. One of the insurance people said that, the last thing we want to do, even though we have room for 600 people, is to put 100 people in there and have what happened like many other churches in the choirs. So do you have any information on liability exposure and what we should be thinking about?
So I'm not an insurance person. I'm not a lawyer. So this is not official advice. Do not quote me.
You are being recorded.
So my understanding, as I'm hearing the camp conversation go on, is that when you check your liability insurance, your umbrella insurance, most of your insurances most likely do not have pandemic or disease details in it, provisions in it. There was some guy who said to us a couple weeks ago that is connected with the State Department. Brian, you might know him. I'm forgetting his name though. The Swedish name. He's an the Covenant insurance guy. Is it Brad Bergstrom?
Hedstrom?
Anyway, Bergstrom? I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, he says that you can't even buy that kind of insurance right now because you wouldn't be able to afford it.
Right.
It would be like $1 million for $900,000 coverage, kind of thing. Yeah. And so he was saying something like only Wimbledon had this foresight 15, 20 years ago. And they're the only company he knows that has this kind of coverage. Right. Right. But then I heard from the East Coast Conference that the Redwood Group, I believe, is the insurance company. They have been their insurance company for a while, and apparently they do have coverage for something like COVID. So they're investigating all of that because none of this data matches up with each other. But my guess is that any of us on here probably don't have that kind of coverage. Now, saying that, what are we liable for is the big question, right? So if we're following the state guidelines, if we've got all the protocols in place, are we liable if somebody happens to catch COVID at First Covenant? Like that, I don't know how that's handled. I don't know legally what we would be responsible for. Would we be the same if, like, how can they prove they didn't get it at the Thai restaurant down the block, or wherever else they went that day? So I'm not quite sure about that.
Because we were trying to figure out, like, requiring masks and all those other things, but do you have your members and anyone that comes in sign a hold harmless to say, hey, I'm here, but I'm not going to hold you liable for anything that happens in here, even if you have all the precautions and everything in there. So that's one of the questions that's come up for us.
Yeah.
David, were you going to add something?
Just really quickly, camps are being told to do
I'll
that.
weigh in with that, Brian.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we just entered into phase 1 just yesterday. Our leadership team said, hey, because of Oregon, Clatsop County entered in phase 1 last week. So our groups, all of our small groups can start meeting. In fact, one of them met right in this room last night, and we set up this room to be able to be all the peers are anyway. But we're asking all of our small group leaders to sign a group guideline to say, I understand what the group guidelines are, and I will help our group members when they meet to follow those group guidelines. And it's in essence the chair of our leadership team. We call him a secretary because we have this weird thing anyway. He's an attorney, and he knows our insurance policies, and he's looked at them carefully, and he's a very wise attorney. His name is Brent Corwin, and he just gave back to me feedback today, a letter that I and Pastor Nathan wrote to the entire congregation. Will go out today, and we'll videotape it and send it to everybody. We'll also send the PDF to the entire congregation via email saying, here's where we're at, here's our phase-in process, here's our group guidelines. So we're communicating to everybody, this is what's expected when you do meet, and you're going to be a part of a meeting that is connected with Community Church. We want you to follow these basic plans, and our group guidelines are things like you're going to sit 6 feet away from other people. You're going to wear a mask, and you're going to not do certain things. You're going to wipe down the clean surfaces. All these basic things that the CDC says are really good practices. Brent said to me via email this morning, that letter is very well written. It communicates clearly what the expectation is, and it lowers our liability risk. And
you share that letter with us?
Yeah, you're following the guidelines. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll share the guidelines, but it was fascinating because we also have one of our group leaders that says, so you don't trust me. I'm not going to sign a signature on something, but you don't trust me. I said, totally, we trust you, but we make covenants together, verbal and written, to say this is what we agree upon. And we have, somebody that's all upset about with my leadership because, and people are stressed out now. So I'm thinking, okay, would you, it's not about your signature, it's about your promise to follow wise practices. Are you going to follow the wise practice? Well, that's no problem, but you want me to sign something? I think, oh my gosh. Okay, Lord, give me patience and be a non-anxious person. Okay, I'll mute my thing again here. Thanks.
Oh, thanks, David. No, that's great. And thanks for providing that as an example.
I think there's wisdom in that leadership, David. And what I mean by that is, maintaining community in the reality we live in is fragile to begin with. We don't have those relationships where we can turn to each other and ask each other to sign paperwork to agree to things. We don't build enough relationship for that paper to mean something to begin with. But we do have the responsibility to communicate clearly what our guidelines are and our request for people to adhere to them, and then empower our leaders to follow through on that reinforcement through the relationships that they do have among the community that they're leading and the groups that they're leading. I feel like, bluntly speaking, as a pragmatic engineer by trade, if we have to have people sign paperwork to come back to church, it's not time. Like, they didn't sign paperwork to come the first time. And we're seeing a ton of people approach us who would never come within our doors, who watch the live streams, because it's a safe way to engage the church without being outed for investigating. So why don't we facilitate more of that in my head? Like, let's double down on that investment rather than speed up things that are uncomfortable.
I will add, what I appreciate about what David said, if I heard correctly too, is it's your leaders you're asking to sign that, and not every member, but yeah. I want to make sure we get to any other conversations or questions in our remaining time. I want to, if I can, call out Chris, and Chris, you can pass, but I know we had email dialogue and maybe you had some questions.
Yeah. So I think I did connect with Brian, so I'll probably talk offline.
Okay.
But if this is helpful to anybody else, I'm just curious, for those who are on the same fiscal year schedule as my church, which is from essentially June to June, what are you doing in terms of COVID's impacts on your budget and potential shortfall of income, maybe anticipation of lower tithing? I don't know if anybody has tenant relationships and they have rental income and people asking for easing of sorts. I'm just curious for perspective or any creative ideas on what you all are doing on that front.
So, budget questions. How are you adjusting or having to make changes?
Well, I'll dive into that one because we just formed a small committee of leadership team, our budget chairperson, myself, and our person who's our office manager, Gail Odo, a lot of you know. And we went
stewardship leader too, right?
And yes, and Jake, our stewardship chairperson. But we went through, again, we have a budget that we started developing as if things were normal back in January, February. Got all the mission teams to, ask what they wanted, blah, blah, blah. Came up with our planned budget. Well, then all this COVID stuff happened. And so we thought, okay, how do we have to do things differently. And there's some things in the budget like youth trips in the summer that aren't going to happen. So we went through line by line and kind of created a expense control budget and it's kind of on a monitoring basis. We're going to finish our fiscal year June 30, and so we're looking at what the expenses July 1st on of what just isn't going to happen, like a mission trip to Peru and get kids going to summer camp. But even we're starting to look at, how a bunch, because we're not using our building, is our utilities going down, so that we can, I felt awkward. Here's our budget for $600 some thousand, but our giving isn't matching that right now. Fortunately, our giving we look back the last year or so of giving, and right now May is actually going to be our second best one in the last 12 months, but it dropped a little bit. So we were thinking we're going to have to implement some expense controls within that budget. So it's actually a kind of a secondary expense control method of we're not buying coffee supplies for the church anymore because nobody's drinking coffee. So we're looking line by line, what can we not spend money on, even though, and we'll find out next week whether the budget's approved, because the congregation has to vote on it. But really looking at what can we just plan on not, we're just not going to spend it because you can't make those trips right now. So and like pastors buying books that we reimburse. Well, you can buy books down the road. You've got lots of books right now. So, little things like that to try to say, okay, where can we cut and what can we reserve? Like right now, we're trying to maintain our staff at the same level that we had, and that's up for discussion. Sorry, David, you have to borrow books from John. So.
That's funny. Thanks, Mark. How about others? Any tenant issues?
One other quick thing, Don, before you move on back on sort of the prior question about the liability. This morning in my HR world, I had a webinar, and one of the issues we talked about was OSHA requirements for employers and how they treat COVID. And if you get an employee who has to go on that, that 14-day, all that. If they think they're exposed, what you as an employer have to do to kind of ask questions of the employee, where do they think they got it, or where do they think they got exposed? You actually have to record that under your OSHA Form 100 as a recorded illness. So if you might look up your, and I could try to figure out forwarding the slide to you folks, but under the OSHA requirements, there are things as employees, what you have to do to track somebody who got exposed or actually got sick, so that it may or may not be it could even be a workers' comp claim, but OSHA definitely wants it recorded. So
interesting.
So you could look up the OSHA guidelines, but sure. That was kind of unique. So.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
Let me take a shot at this.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.
So we have parking revenue. We have a tenant. We have two buildings. One's got 10,000 square feet that we use. And I think Kyle or Chris had mentioned earlier, the kind of losing revenue. What we realized early on in March and April was that our tenant was basically they're an education-based. They have students who take out loans to learn what they teach, and then they go out in the world and have a practice. And I literally was talking to her yesterday, and we've been giving them rent free because they don't have literally the money, because the students have all been basically dropping their tuition. We're pretty concerned that in September they're not going to reboot their business, and they may make a hard decision in March of next year. We've been talking to our parking revenue, and nobody's driving, nobody's parking. So mathematically, what happened to us is the congregation, praise God, stayed where they were. They've not dropped off, but we had about a $70,000 a month income level, and our expenses are pretty close there to 60, 65 a month, but now our revenue's down around 40,000. So we had promised our staff that we didn't do PPP. We just kind of felt like we had 600,000 in the bank, and it just will let other people that might need it a little bit more. But we promised our staff that we were going to keep things at full time through June. And tonight's I talked to Greg earlier this week, and tonight's the night we're talking to the council. But we're going to have to go through some layoffs and some staff reduction in terms of FTE just to get this thing through to next year to allow some of the revenue to come back. So it's been a really, I was talking to our pastor, our interim pastor. We're also going through a pastoral search at the same time. I think it was 2 o'clock in the morning when I finally went to sleep, because this has just been gnawing at me quite a bit. But we just felt that, you know, over this summer, we're going to try to come up with a new plan and try to figure out how to, you know, in a kind of like camp. I mean, you know, a lot of people don't know my wife is cousins with Rob Morweiss. So, and my brother-in-law is Mark Carlson. So I have a lot of connections with camp and have had a lot of conversations with them. And
For those who don't know, that's the director and what's Mark's title? Assistant director or associate director of the camp.
Thank you.
Because not everyone here knows that.
So, you know, last thing I'll say is our coming in chair and I spend just about every day on the phone. We have 7 plans to our multi-tiered budget. We help the camp and other churches try to put their budgets together, and we've used the same, you know, the optimistic, the realistic, and then the challenging scenario. And I'll just say, you know, what we've been looking at is we're into the challenging area, and we're trying to figure out how, we don't want to do this twice, but we're trying to figure out how do we get things positioned now. So, you know, we're probably gonna go through 60,000 of our reserves, and then next year, right now, we're trying to fix a $150,000 hole that we have in our budget. So that's what we're doing.
Wow. Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Brian and Mark. Yeah, that was, Brian, I think we can talk offline more, but I appreciate the insight, because it sounds like all of us are having to really scrutinize our budgets and gear up for what could be a pretty tough fiscal year. If anything, it's nice knowing we aren't alone in that. So I appreciate insight, to say the least.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Chris. That's actually a great note to end on as we're coming here to 1 o'clock, because that's the whole purpose of these times, is to help each other and to know that you're not trying to figure this out on your own, that you have us as conference staff, but each other as covenanters, that we can resource and share those best practices. And with that, I want to say, you know, if you do find this helpful to just have an open kind of processing time like this, and think it would be helpful to do that again sooner rather than later, just shoot me an email and let me know. I don't want to add to the Zoom fatigue either. And so we're trying to pace ourselves and figure out what's helpful. But we've recently sent out a kind of a survey, you know, check in to all our pastors too, to say, what do you need right now? What are the resources that we can kind of get on top of and help you all with? So please feel free to email me back. You have my email address to suggest topics, to say, yes, let's do this again in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, in a month, whatever the case be. Greg, did you want to?
Just really quickly, I'm not sure if, I don't remember if you mentioned it, but Dawn is collecting other plans like what Cannon Beach had put together as far as phasing. We're sticking that into a folder online. So if you're interested in that, just ping one of us and we can send you the link to that. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, we're putting them together in a Dropbox file, and we can make it available to you. Okay. Well, thank you again so much for giving us this hour, giving each other this hour, and for ways you are serving your church in a season that you probably none of us ever imagined. But thank you for your faithfulness, and that we can be together in this. Check out the chat and click any links before you go. But I will also have a recording of this available too. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. God bless.
Thank you.